I'm speaking with Democratic nominee for Iowa's 4th Congressional District, Ryan Melton. Good to be chatting with you this morning, Ryan.
Glad to be here.
So we're less than a month out now from Election Day. How are you feeling about how things are going with the campaign?
Well, other than feeling really sick this morning, I feel pretty good. Um, I think the momentum is undeniable. The Kevin Virgil endorsement is definitely a big deal. It really corroborates what I've already been seeing and hearing on the campaign trail for quite a long time, which is that a lot of Republican rank and file voters are ready to do something different. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to flock to change their voter affiliation or anything right now, but um, a lot of rank and file Republicans have been telling me the past year plus that they really feel like they've been sold out by the leaders of the Iowa Republican Party. They've been sold out to the likes of Bruce Rastetter. They're angry about the attacks on public education and the AEAs, just like Democrats are. They're shocked that we have a cancer crisis in the state and their elected officials refuse to acknowledge it. They're ready to send a message to their leadership that it's time that the rank and file stop being taken for granted in this state.
So one of those first things you mentioned, that was one of the things I was curious to ask you about. So back in August, you received a very surprising endorsement from Republican Kevin Virgil, who ran against Randy Feenstra in the GOP primary in the 4th Congressional District. Why do you think you got that endorsement?
Well, I mean, if you read Kevin Virgil's endorsement article that he wrote on his X account, on his Twitter account, he laid it out very well. In fact, about 95% of the stuff that he said in that endorsement article are things that I've long been campaigning on. He made very clear that he thinks it's time for Republican voters to prioritize people over party, and that over the last 40 plus years in this congressional district, the Iowa State Republican Party has not been doing that. They've been doing whatever they can to grab and consolidate power. But the problem has been during that time that we've seen this cratering in quality of life indicators across the board, as Kevin Virgil pointed out. The cancer crisis, the drops in public education rankings, the hollowing out of our congressional district, the massive population decline. Um, this is hurting Republican rank and file voters. Um, so he laid it out very clearly. The other thing too is that considering the alternative in Randy Feenstra, a guy who is awash in corporate PAC money, a guy that most people have a hard time trusting because they know he takes his marching orders from his corporate handlers, as opposed to me, who has always rejected corporate PAC money, who does not use party talking points, who I mean, I just speak truth as I see it, and whether it ruffles feathers in my party or not. I'm just going to do the best that I can to assess the variables at stake and to make the best decisions, regardless of consideration for whether it's where the Democratic Party leadership wants me to be or not.
What did you think when you found out about that endorsement? Because obviously that is not a typical thing, which is why people were so surprised by it in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, I was a little surprised by it, but not a whole lot. Kevin Virgil and I had spoken
Mhm.
a few times before that point, primarily around our mutual opposition of the carbon capture pipelines. Um, so it wasn't a big surprise. Obviously Kevin Virgil and I have plenty of disagreements on things, but the few areas we do have alignment on are really big areas of alignment. And I know that not just Kevin Virgil, but a lot of Republicans in this congressional district are really disappointed that Randy Feenstra is their choice, considering he's owned by Bruce Rastetter, considering he is public facing in his support for the carbon capture pipelines that most Iowans, Republicans and Democrats alike, are opposed to. Um, so, I mean, I felt, I was grateful. I was grateful to Kevin for the endorsement. It was a very brave thing of him to do. And Clearly, as we saw the week after that endorsement, the Iowa Republican Party leadership circled the wagons and did whatever they could to attack him. But he doubled down because he's a man of principle, and I respect that. And the other thing too is when the Iowa Republican Party leadership doubled down in their attacks of Kevin Virgil for the endorsement, um, you'll notice that not one of their tweets, not one of their Facebook posts address any of the very valid concerns that Kevin Virgil had, that he wrote about in that endorsement article of me.
You mentioned at an event in Lamar's back in September that you made a point of going to some incredibly red parts of the district. I know you've done events in Sioux County, which, if I remember correctly, at least at the presidential level, the last time Sioux County voted for a Democrat was FDR in 1936. Why do you think it's important to do events in some of those parts of the district?
People are people and pain is pain. It's that simple. If you're running to represent a constituency, the only way you can do that is by getting to know them, by listening to them. I'm not running to represent just Democrats. I'm running to represent everybody. And, I think that truth is truth. Doesn't matter where you are, doesn't matter who you're talking to. And I think that for a Randy Feenstra, who among Republicans is known as an absentee congressman, who among Republicans is one who is not known for answering his emails, is not known for exposing himself to public scrutiny. I want to provide the residents of the 4th Congressional District a different option.
Um, Kind of going back to some biographical stuff, just for folks who might not know or remember from the previous cycle. What do you do for work, and how long have you done that for?
So I work for a Fortune 100 company in personal lines insurance, primarily home and auto, nationwide. I run a team of 21 people, and I've been doing that for roughly 8 years now.
What's the oddest odd job that you've ever had?
The oddest odd job I've ever had. Well, I don't think I've had a very odd one. I've had a number of odd jobs that aren't oddly odd, I'd say. I've had some newspaper routes.
Like to hear that.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so I grew up in Omaha, Nebraska, when I was a kid, and delivering Omaha World Heralds on a Sunday, very backbreaking, especially when you hit the neighborhood when you know the dog, that 50% of the time is, off the leash, is going to come running after you. It's really hard to run with a bunch of Omaha World Herald Sunday editions away from dogs. I can tell you that much. So, um, in middle school, actually, I lived in Lorenz, Iowa, which is in Pocahontas County in our congressional district. Lived there for a few years with my grandparents, and I had a newspaper out there too. And I remember I made just enough money from that weekly newspaper route to where I'd go to the grocery store and buy a snack. I mean, I certainly wasn't in it for the money, I was in it for the greater good of spreading the news to the fine folks of Lorenz, Iowa.
What initially fostered an appreciation for politics for you?
That's hard to answer because I've just always been interested in it. I guess if, you know, reflecting on that, I mean, I like I like identifying gaps in process that hurt people so that we can fix those gaps and help people. I do that quite a bit at work. Um, I'm really intrigued by what happens when people come together when there's problems and attempt to solve them to create good, and to create security for people. I care an awful lot about justice. I care an awful lot about the fact that in the land of plenty like we live in, the fact that you have tens of millions in poverty, you have over 100,000 Americans a year going bankrupt due to medical debt, you have millions of kids going to bed hungry. That stuff is because of a series of political decisions in which the powers that be have made a choice that people are expendable. And I would argue that we can make different choices. We certainly have the resources to make different decisions so that less suffering and less stress is happening in our country. And you can talk to any economist worth their salt, and they'll tell you if you invest in people, good things happen. But for far too long, local, county, state, federal, there's long been this clash of whether we invest in people or not. And if we invest in people, oh man, that means you're gonna have to spend some money. Well, I can tell you, um, any financial advisor, any economist will tell you you have to spend some money to make some money, and you have to spend some money, you have to invest some money to grow. And in our fourth congressional district, we have certainly not been growing. That's for sure. We've been represented by folks that care very little about investing in our communities. Um, and we're seeing the results of that. We're now last in the country in mental health care bed availability rate, last in the country in OBGYN availability rate. We have a lower per capita household income than most of our surrounding Midwestern states. Our public education system is plummeting due to chronic underfunding. We have a crisis in public health care, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, I guess a lot of different reasons why I'm interested.
You ran in 2022 and you didn't get the result that you wanted. Why did you decide to step up again and run this time?
Well, let me kind of clarify something there. I mean, when I ran in 2022, I didn't run with a certain result in mind. I ran because I had to, because no one else was going to do it. So, I mean, to me, considering I had no money, no connections, no name recognition, no pedigree, I started from scratch. Arguably the most grassroots congressional campaign, in 2022. I didn't want to do it. I didn't plan to do it. No one recruited me to do it. There was just a situation where I felt it would be untenable and indefensible for the party that I'm in, and certainly have plenty of disagreements with, but still we're a bigger tent party, Indefensible for us just to leave a blank spot on the ballot in this race. Indefensible to not speak truth to power. Indefensible to not hold Rainey Feenstra and the big money that makes him run accountable. Um, and so, I got in because it was the right thing to do. And we got 30% of the vote, which a lot of people said, gosh, considering your campaign was so short, because again, I got in as late as I possibly could, not planning to do that with my life. Getting as late as I did with a wife and kids with a full-time job, literally having to build this from nothing. A lot of people have said, wow, we were shocked you got 30%, considering all that. But anyway, so why did we run again? Well, we ran again because we faced a similar situation. There was one person that I met with mid last year who was interested in running, and I appreciate him for that. But it was pretty apparent that, um, let's just say, it felt pretty apparent he there was a high risk that he was not going to be able to see it through. And considering that was the only option, and considering that I had built the infrastructure over time during our first campaign, and also considering the fact that a lot of the same issues I ran on were even more amplified this time around, it just kind of naturally became clear that I needed to do it because no one else was going to step up to do it. And there's so many amazing folks here in the fourth that deserve the amplification of their voice and concerns. And again, if you don't have anyone running, that just doesn't happen. So I look at this not as an opportunist. I have no interest in building a brand for myself or building anything for selfish reasons. I look at this as a sacrifice for the greater good, something that I can give to hopefully move the needle closer to good.
So in this campaign this time, what are the big concerns that you're hearing from residents in the fourth district?
Well, I'd say number one, financial insecurity. Um, but that was the same from last time, and that's been the same that most Americans would cite going back decades and decades. That number, 60% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. I mean, that's been a problem for a long, long time, spanning many presidential administrations, because inherently there are big flaws with the status quo economically. So that's number one. Public education, the attacks on public education, the attacks on the AA system have been on the minds of many. And while certainly that is primarily a state issue, that's not only a state issue. There are federal funding sources at play as well. Um, the carbon capture pipelines are obviously a big deal, big deal. And that comes up all over the district. I was arguably the first Iowa politician to run against them, long before most Iowans even knew what they were. The cancer crisis is a big deal, especially considering very few candidates or elected officials around here wish to even acknowledge we have a cancer crisis. But we have some of the biggest or highest cancer rates in the world, depending upon which county you look at, like a Palo Alto, for example. Um, Water quality comes up quite a bit. A lot of people, regardless of political affiliation, are really frustrated that we have a major water pollution problem, and yet our elected officials refuse to acknowledge that for the most part. Um, and the general hollowing out. Just the fact that of the 36 counties in our fourth congressional district, the vast majority of those counties have seen really steady population decline the last 40 years, which has a lot of downstream ramifications as far as the cratering of those quality of life indicators we've been talking about.
Um, I had a question that kind of relates to the things you were talking about there. Earlier this year, the Gazette in Cedar Rapids, which we do a lot of work with, had lengthy reporting that involved some University of Iowa studies showing that nitrate consumption may cause bladder and ovarian cancer in older women. And there was a 2018 review of 30 academic studies that showed a link between ingesting nitrate from drinking water and adult diseases, including certain kinds of cancer. What do you think the best way is for the state to balance very real environmental concerns and health concerns with the fact that we live in an agricultural state, and that's going to be the economy of this state for the continuing future?
Well, you kind of get to an interesting point there, though, that plenty of agronomists say that the topsoil erosion that we are seeing is unsustainable, which is driving a lot of these waterway pollution issues. Um, and so in the next 50 years, we may not be able to do ag the way we do it now, which in and of itself is a big concern because, again, our elected officials won't say something like that out loud. Um, so beyond that, what do you do about it? Well, I think first off, you need to get all stakeholders to the table, including farmers. Plenty of farmers acknowledge the concern and have already begun to implement mitigative practices to address the root causes of the water pollution issue. But obviously, we need a lot more of that. But I think that you're going to find plenty of stakeholders to farm who the last thing they would want to do is to harm our waterways. But we definitely have to get all the stakeholders to the table. Um, the other thing that really strikes me is um, as long as you have massive amounts of corporate money in the political space, in the legislative space, corporate money kills common sense. I hear this all the time in Republican rooms as well that there are plenty of common sense solutions out there if we are willing to put a little money behind it. But oftentimes, corporate money is the wall that we cannot get through. So whether it be incentivizing more robustly buffer strips along waterways, whether it be rethinking how tiling is done, because I mean, we've got so much tiling in Iowa agriculture that, for those who say you have to remove tiling, well, that's not really a feasible solution just because there's so much of it. So what do you do with the situation we've got? And I've actually talked to farmers about this who say, well, who thought about it and who've told me, well, I think we could do things like create basins within the tiling before the water leaves the piping and goes into the waterway, where we put organic material in the pipe basins to grab the nutrient before the water exits the pipe. Um, Obviously, things like soil protection, cover cropping, crop rotation, minimizing till, um, diversify the kinds of things we grow. Because when you grow row crop like corn over and over again, that amplifies erosion and waterway pollution impacts. And also, I think we need to figure out how to get to a place where we're not over applying fertilizer so much. Um, Agronomists have put together formulas that have shown, um, per the amount of land you are applying to, what a reasonable amount of fertilizer is and where the rate of diminishing returns is. When you keep on adding more and more and more, you get less and less return at some point, but you amplify the amount of water pollution. So there's no one solution to it. There's a lot of things, there's a lot of plugins that we could certainly work on. But I can certainly tell you, this idea that if you talk about water pollution in the state, that you're anti-farmer, I think that's really offensive to farmers. Because plenty of farmers I talk to know there's a problem, want to do something about it. But a lot of farmers, they farm on rented land, right? They don't have complete control over what happens in the land they farm. Um, a lot of complicated issues there, but those certainly are not going to be solved if we refuse to talk about them. And up to this point, most elected officials that run this state simply refuse to acknowledge the problems.
I wanted to pivot and talk about some other specific issues. Something that got talked about a lot following the shooting in Perry, Iowa this year was the idea of having school officials or someone on school staff being allowed to carry firearms. Where do you stand on that issue?
Well, I mean, the fact that insurance companies refuse to cover schools where teachers are carrying tells you all you really need to know. I mean, the insurance industry is all about risk assessment. I'm in the insurance industry, so I know all about it. Um, if the insurance company is telling you we're not going to insure that because it's too risky, they have the most robust analytics when it comes to risk assessment. So, um, absolutely, I would not be in support of any legislation that allows teachers to carry firearms in school. I think beyond that, look, I mean, the science on neurology is pretty clear that the human brain is not emotionally fully developed until roughly 25. So do I want a bunch of young folks who um, you know to have access to that kind of stuff? I mean, we've seen plenty of situations where a student can overpower a teacher, no problem. Uh, Seems like a really, really risky situation to me. That really doesn't get to the root cause. In fact, what it does is it says, hey, as legislators, we're doing something. Well, no, you're not. You're not addressing the root cause as to why we have a school shooting problem. What you're doing is you're prioritizing a band-aid solution, which isn't even a band-aid at all. It's a failed um, solution, um, defraying time and resources away from true resources that actually get to and mitigate the root causes of why this stuff happens in the first place.
Something else you have already touched on a couple times since we've been chatting is the use of eminent domain for a carbon capture pipeline, which obviously is still kicking around in the state. Where do you stand on that issue? And have you been surprised at all that this has been one of those rare contentious issues that seems to have kind of a bipartisan tilt to it?
So first off, I was arguably the first candidate for office in this state that ran against the pipelines, dating back all the way to early 2022, long before most Iowans even knew what they were. Um, so I'm robustly opposed. to the use of eminent domain for these pipelines. I'm also opposed to the pipelines for a lot of other reasons too. But as far as whether I'm surprised by that cross partisan support, I'm not. When I go into rooms full of Republicans, we agree on a lot more than we don't. There's a certain entity, a certain power that does not want us to know that, that thrives on division. But I've spoken to plenty of Republicans. I've been to plenty of rooms where I was the only Democrat. And I've just been honest. I don't pander. I don't hide who I am. I'm honest about who I am and what I believe. I lay it all on the table. Let the chips fall where they may and be at peace with it. I sleep very peacefully at night. I have not sold my soul out. Um, but you find time and time again that we agree on a heck of a lot more than we don't. And the idea that this is even an issue at this point, the idea that a corporation can come in, can spend hundreds of thousands of dollars buying a state's politicians, like a Bruce Ressler has done to a Kim Reynolds or a Rennie Feenstra, and then can put pressure on a state entity that approves or denies eminent domain requests, and they successfully do so for a pipeline that environmental groups have long said is not a real climate change solution. A pipeline that would take massive swaths of land via eminent domain and then would put a pipeline in on your land that, if fractured, can asphyxiate you and kill you and your family. That's also a massive waste of taxpayer money and a massive threat to the water availability in our state, a state which, again, is back in drought condition in most of its 99 counties, having gotten out of a drought after a multi-year long severe drought, in a state where it's our own DNR doesn't even know how much water our aquifers hold. And much of this water would be drawn for the pipelines would be drawn from those aquifers. There's no good reason for it. There's no good reason for it. So does it surprise me that there's a cross-partisan anger against these pipelines? It does not surprise me.
Um, the fourth congressional district is one of the districts in the state that saw a libertarian candidate thrown off the ballot for the general election. That would be Charles Aldrich. How do you feel about the fact that there's not going to be a libertarian option for people on the ballot?
I've been very public facing in my disgust of what the Iowa Republican Party and what our court system did to my libertarian friends. So I've been very public about that. Charles is a good dude. I like him a lot. We don't agree on a whole lot, but that's fine. He's a good guy and he's running for the right reasons. And the justification that led to Marco and Chuck and I think Nicholas out in Eastern Iowa, what led them to being kicked off the ballot. Um, we're doing the reading on it. It was simply because they had their initial convention. They selected their delegates and didn't wait a day until they did the next step. That's it. And I know that's the way the law is written, but do you really think the spirit of the law was intended to do what that law was used for, to reduce the amount of choice that voters have? So I thought it was shameful, and I feel really bad for my libertarian friends and for Charles, and it's only bad, only bad.
So we've got less than a month left at this point. So from now until election day, what's sort of the day-to-day schedule for you in this race?
Well, I mean, we're working on getting our final text campaign out to Republicans, Independents, and Democrats, talking about things such as the Virgil endorsement to my Republican and Independent friends. Um, Working on a lot of radio ads right now, working on the logistics for that. Working on some streaming digital ads as well. We're not a big money campaign. I can't just blanket the airwaves with every ad I want. so you have to be very strategic about it. Um, but we're going to make a push here at the very end to get on as many radio and streaming platforms as we can. We've already done quite a bit better this time than last time as far as the ads we've put out there in various ways and the text campaigns we've done. Um, but certainly over the next week to 2 weeks, that's the big goal is to get all those out the door. Um, but also, just continuing to meet people where they are at various events. Yeah, yeah, a lot of the same kind of stuff I've been doing the entire time.
Um, Quintessential Iowa question for you that I always like to ask people. A few weeks back now, we had a story about a bar in Bronson, not too far away from us, making the final cut for the best breaded pork tenderloin in the state. Um, are you a pork tenderloin guy, and what would your pick be for the best pork tenderloin in the state?
Well, I'm a vegetarian, Jared, so
Okay. The technology's gotten good enough. There's probably a good
there's probably a vegetarian pork tenderloin out there.
yeah.
But I haven't found it yet. But now that you've put that idea in my head, I'm going to go hunting for it. So unfortunately, I cannot weigh in the great pork tenderloin debate of 2024. Although I wish I could. I will say though, I've certainly eaten at a lot of amazing restaurants in our congressional district. It's pretty easy to see that I like food, and I certainly know how to eat it. Uh, you know, Gosh, what are some amazing places I've had food at? Gosh, there's so many. Oh, actually, up in Sioux City, I can't remember the name of the restaurant right now. So in Sioux City, there's this really beautiful mural of a mother and her two daughters. Um, and I think it was a Thai restaurant by the mural. Do you know what I'm
Yeah,
talking about?
not too far. That's on West 7th Street here in town.
Yeah, and I had it was a tofu and vermicelli noodle dish with some sweet sauce. That was just a couple weeks ago. That was amazing. That was amazing. So when I got back to Sioux City, after that, I really wanted to go, and the fact that I couldn't really bummed me out. But Gosh, but I could go on and on. A lot of good food out there in the fourth congressional district for sure.
Well, the fine restaurants on West 7th Street will appreciate that shout out. I know that's for sure. Those were all the questions I had for you today. Thank you so much, Ryan Melton, for your time.
Thank you so much.